he defends himself in a bold manner, and we see that right here in these verses, it's amazing that Paul is not doing it for the sake of Paul to be defended. Capture that. Get that. Paul's not standing up and defending himself to say, I have this title. I'm the church planter. Don't forget who I am. The reason why Paul steps up and defends himself, it's only because it is simply to defend the work of God or the gospel. If the name of Christ is being hindered in the process, that's where Paul steps up and defends himself. Only for those manners. Only for those reasons. Otherwise, we've seen Paul. Where does Paul live? He suffers for Christ. He suffers. If there's somebody that we know that suffered all kinds of times where he could have defended himself, and it was Paul. But you see, there's times where he doesn't, because it would have been about Paul. But when it's about the gospel, when it's about Jesus Christ, he steps up and responds. Otherwise, let God deal with it. Let God deal with it. We see that going on in the next few verses, we see that there's an answer from Paul going on from verses 3 to 11. Look at the answer that Paul gives going on in the rest of the few verses. He says, "Mine answer to them that examine me is this." And he goes on to say, "Have we not power to eat and drink? Have we not a power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as us, the other apostles, as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas?" And on and on. We're gonna see if we can continue on here, but let's start with those verses there. When we eat or drink something, have we not the power to do so? And that's what Paul first talks about there. Have we not the power to eat and to drink something? Today I had the ability to eat or drink something as I started my day. I chose not to in the beginning of my day. But I have the power to eat or drink something on my own. A little bit later, I ended up eating something and decided I'm going to have this bowl of soup right here. And amen. And that's what I had. And I have the power to be able to take care of myself and do that when I'm hungry. In the mornings, you know what I make sure that I do get? I make sure that I get my caffeine in. I get my coffee. I make sure that I do that because I want that in my day. Okay? It could be maybe damaging maybe down the road in my life. I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, hey, I got the power in my life that I want to drink this coffee. I want to eat some food. And I can do those things. He goes on to talk about not only do we have that ability, but he talks about being able to lead a sister, mainly in reference to like a wife type category. Paul, of course, was single at the time. He could have chosen to take a wife if he wanted to, but we've already seen that that's not what he chose to do with his life. But he mentions that there was others, like Cephas, who would have been Peter, and he was an apostle, and he had the ability, the power to lead about a wife. We know that Peter is one of the ones that we definitely know was married, as we've seen that Jesus himself, he heals his mother-in-law. He heals her of that fever. So we know that Peter was one of those married apostles. It's something that some of them had. And he says, do we not have the power to do these things? Then he goes on to talk about that. I like the example he gives in verse 7. Who goeth about a warfare any time at his own charges? Think about that for a second. Warfare. Somebody who's gone to war, right, or has been in the military. When you go to war, you go to military, you go to certain warfare. You signed up to serve the country. When you sign up to serve and end up going to war, they don't just say to you, hey, good luck. Right? Hey, thanks for signing up, and you better go get yourself suited up and and maybe get yourself a good weapon in the process. They don't just tell you that. The military here in the United States, I'm thankful for the military here. I mention that often. They give you some of the best gear. They give you some of the best weapons, some of the best, maybe at times bulletproof vests or whatever have you. They give you the best because they want you to go out there and do the job of going to war, and they give you all the tools that you need to get that job done. And Paul says, somebody who goes to war, does he pay for it himself? Does he use his own money to go out there? No, it's taken care of. It's taken care of. I like how he uses the example going on. He says, who plants a vineyard and eateth not the fruit thereof? Who would do the work of doing a garden or the full-on farm work, do all that labor, and not enjoy a little bit of the fruits of the labor, if you will? Who would do that? I wouldn't. Most people that are going to do something like that truly enjoy all those things. And then he says, and who would eat the fruit thereof? Who wouldn't enjoy that? Who eateth not of the milk of the flock? Who feedeth the flock? He talks about those things. I know people that are cattle farmers, and these cattle farmers, it would be silly if they would raise these cattle and sell them off and butcher them and all that and never have a steak, right? Or never maybe drink some milk or something, having raised all these cattle. Wouldn't that be crazy? But Paul says he's using these things as an example. Who lives this way? Don't they have the power to do those things? Aren't they worthy of these things? Enjoying these things, these rewards, if you will, they're perks of the job. He goes on to say, if you haven't figured it out altogether, where Paul's getting at, and we see here in verse 9 and 10, it says, for it's written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt it is written that he that ploweth shall plow in hope, and he that thresheth in hope shall be a partaker of his hope. We see here that he's talking about even the ox that's helping do a job. And if you want a strong ox that's going to turn the wheels of whatever maybe you're doing in the old type farming days, wouldn't it be smart to let them also get some nourishment and some reward for their work so that they can continue to be strong oxen serving, doing their job? Wouldn't it be important for them to do that? Paul's using all these things as an example. What example is he getting at? Look at verse 11. We're getting there. He says, if we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? So what he's talking about is, as a man of God, who Paul was, and if we think about people that are men of God that we get to see in our lives, missionaries, I love them, the ones that come through the church, maybe an evangelist or something, maybe the pastor of the church. I guess I would be one in that category. Paul says all these things are true about power that we have in our life, things that we deserve to have. We see that the ones that do these type of jobs and whatnot, what they deserve as an outcome. And then he goes on to say, and we too that help you with spiritual things, should we not reap carnal things? All to say, Paul is also saying, as he's giving this response to the church in Corinth, he's trying to say the man of God is worthy of his hire. He's worthy of his reward, like we see in these different examples. That's what Paul's getting at. He says he's worthy of his reward, just like in anything else in this life that's worthy of a reward for work. And that's why he says we shall reap carnal things. But it's interesting that he goes on to say, if others be partakers of this power over you, Are not we rather, nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffered all things, lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ? As Paul goes on to give this example of men that are worthy of their hire, or jobs that are worthy of reward and taking care of things, he goes on to say, and even though I deserve this, as Paul would say, he says, I've never demanded it of you. I've never said, hey, where's my reward? We know Paul's life. What was his life? He was a tent maker on the side. He made sure that he worked the job to make his ends meet, to take care of his carnal needs. You know, if you think about how effective the Apostle Paul was, and imagine if he was a full-time man of God, like he pretty much was, and never took time to do that tent making, but just focused 100% of his effort. Can you imagine the things that Paul would have accomplished? Having seen his life, the things that he did accomplish. Could you imagine if he didn't dedicate any time to tent making to make sure that he had those carnal things, the things that he deserves or to eat and whatnot? Can you imagine what else Paul could have done in his life? Can you imagine how God could have used him? And this is exactly what Paul is talking about. He's like, hey, these men of God are worthy of reward. And then he gives us verse 14. Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. And Paul's basically, hey, I'm just going to live of the gospel. Hey, as we're looking at all this and we see that the church in Corinth was probably attacking him, then they were like, are you even an apostle? Do you deserve all these things? We can come to the conclusion that this church that he planted, we come to the conclusion that they probably weren't giving him any type of paycheck or reimbursement. They probably weren't. He was doing mission work. He wasn't there anyways. But they probably didn't take him on as a missionary. Those are the conclusions we can get here as he's teaching in these things of a healthy church. By the way, a healthy church does take care of the men of God. That's why the missionaries, when they come through here, hey, I can't support them all, and sometimes I wish I could support a whole lot more of them. But I make sure we take care of them while they're here. There's some of them that aren't here for very long. The last two that were here, we had a few big days, and they came in on those big days, and it was like, hey, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. And that was pretty much like all I said to them, and I was busy doing all these other things. But you know what? I made sure that I would either meet them later or prior. I would take care of them. I said, hey, you know what? Here's something from the church right here. Hey, you know what? We're able to. Hey, you need anything? I remember one of the missionaries, they stayed in a place here that we took care of them here nearby. And on their way out, I asked them, hey, how's your gas tank doing before you leave? How is that? And he stopped and looked, and he was just like, I really appreciate you asking. He's like, but I just filled it up. But thank you so much. Because I believe what Paul's talking about. I believe in taking care of the man of God. The work that he's doing is worthy of hire. It's worthy. And these are the points that Paul is getting at as he begins to respond to these questions. And anyways, as I think about this, there's a humorous story. And maybe I've told it before, I don't know. I probably have. I always forget what I tell or don't tell. But my pastor, when he started the church in Oregon, there he is. He was pumping some gas in his car, doing some ministry work there in Oregon. And this guy that was pumping gas there next to him, he asked him, hey, what do you do? He's like, oh, I'm a pastor. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, we go to, the Mormon church over here. And we know a guy that gives us the word there too. He's like, oh, really? And he was like, so are you full-time? Does the church pay you something to do your job? And he's like, well, actually, yeah, sure they do, And he's like, well, we don't pay our pastor at our church. We don't believe in that. We don't do that type of stuff. And he said to him, oh, you don't do that? Okay. Well, the Bible does say that that they which that preach the gospel should live of the gospel, and since your pastor over there is not preaching the gospel, it's no reason why that this is true for what's going on there at your church. And the guy just stared at him and was like, "What did you just say?" And I thought it was humorous, the way he responded to him. And hey, there was some truth in that. But hey, that they that preach the gospel should live of the gospel. Okay, think about that. What I just said there, by the way. But it's a humorous story. Going along, he goes on to say, "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel." Then Paul goes on to basically say, you know what? Whether you take care of me, whether you understand what I'm saying, whether you see what's right and what's wrong in the Christian life, what matters for my life is that I preach the gospel. Whether I have to stand up for myself or not, I know one thing. I've got to preach the gospel. And by any means necessary, I'm going to do just that because, hey, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. Hey, it's up to you how you want to live your life. But me, I got to preach the gospel. I got to preach the gospel. He says in verse 17, if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. And we know that the reward he's talking about is in heaven. He's like, if I preach willingly, if I patiently teach the word of God, I'll have a reward. If it's against my will, the dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. What is my reward then? Verily that I preach the gospel, that I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. Once again, he's got a good testimony there. And then he gives us another good point right here. Looking on these next few verses. A good one for you and I to take on. He says, for though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And we've seen the next few verses. To the Jew I became as a Jew. To the law as I became as those under the law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might save some, is basically the end of the passage there. Hey, you and I, it would do us a world of good if you and I would learn about what's important to other people. You know, that I could do a lot better job myself. Let's say somebody really cares about, I don't know, somebody really cares about pogo sticks, okay? And let's say there's the pogo stick club. That'd be a weird club, probably, right? The pogo stick club. I'd like to go see what they do at the pogo stick club. You know, bounce around on a pogo stick. I don't know anything about pogo sticks. Anybody ever pogo stick before? Anybody ever bounce? One guy. Oh, we got one. Nobody else pogo stick? I've tried a pogo stick, but can't say I've really done a good job at it. But you know what? Pogo sticks. If there was a group of people and I knew that they weren't Christians, and I was there among them, and they decided to listen to me for a second. Oh, hey, look, let's listen to this Kenny guy. You know what would make me more effective to win them? If I knew what the best brand of pogo stick was. If I knew the best way to jump on it, or if I knew some things about the pogo stick and why they love it. Maybe I'm not going to get on the pogo stick and maybe not really do it, but if I just had knowledge about it, I might just win some of those guys. You know that? Long ago, and I've been kind of losing the practice more and more, especially now that I've been a pastor, which I need to improve it. I talk about it all the time, though. I had to learn it, though. The game of football, there used to be a time where I could care less about football. Didn't really know anything about it. And then I saw how effective it was to know about football. Then I found out how fun it was, right? But I noticed how effective it made me for the cause of Christ. I was able to talk to a whole lot more men in the Oregon area Just if I would just start talking about sports. If I just had some kind of knowledge about a certain team or some certain knowledge about what was going on. And it's easy, by the way. You can just get on there, ESPN app, whatever, right? If I just feed myself a little bit of knowledge here real quick, I don't have to maybe watch every game, but you can just get some highlights, get some of that knowledge. And if you just know some, you might just lead some. This is what Paul's talking about. He says, I become all things to all men that I might save some. Wow. It's impactful. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of it sometimes myself too, I don't care about that. What do I care about that? I don't care about any of those things. But if I would see the value of knowing something about those things, I might just reach somebody that cares about those things, that knows about those things. And it's something that we can take heed to. Hey, do you want to save some? Hey, would you like to be a more effective soul winner? Hey, would you like to be able to folksy, if you will, with people better? Depends on how much you know. If you don't know nothing and you can't really relate with people, then what are we trying to do with our lives? Are we trying to lead people to Christ? Or are we just trying to, maybe I'll save some, maybe not? Hey, Paul had it as a goal in his life. It was his life goal. I won't save them all, but I'll save some. And if I must become all things to all men in the process, I'll do that so that some can be saved. It's powerful. I love this chapter, how impactful it is. And then we see in the last part of the section, and we've seen this so many times, verses 20 through 24, going on 23 to 27. Then he talks about winning a prize, winning the reward. We see that in our life, we have a race to run. And if we're running the race of life, we might as well run to win. We might as well run to win. Otherwise, why run? If you're not running to win, why are you running? And Paul says, hey, I'm gonna run my race to receive a prize. Not everybody's going to receive the prize. Not everyone will obtain the reward. But Paul says, but me, let's run so that we can obtain. Let's run so that we can obtain. Hey, all the runners we see in life, they're running for a crown that's corruptible. But you and I, you see, we're running for an incorruptible crown. And then he goes on to say how he keeps his body, bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when he's preached to others, he himself should be cast away. You know, I'll say this one thing about running our race, about being a master of things. As a matter of fact, let me rewind a second here. Verse 25. Every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Striveth for the mastery. You know, it's interesting how in life, you and I, the things in life, we become masters at certain things in life. We've all done it. We all have something that we are good at. And we become good at it by practicing it, right? If I have a plumbing job at my job and I hate plumbing, I want to call a plumber because he's a master at that job. I call the plumber to come help me fix the situation. I call the master. And it's interesting how all of our lives, we can spend all our time becoming masters at certain things here in life that are just temporary. They're just things that are going to be while we're here. And this is another thing that Paul's talking about. He's like, be careful. that as you run your race, trying to win a prize, if you're really trying to run for that prize, make sure that you're a master at the things of God. With all the other things that you do, be a master at that thing. I talked about leading people to Christ in a better fashion, knowing things so you can be more effective. We won't be soul winners if we don't master it, if you don't try it. You won't ever successfully teach or preach the Word of God if you don't master it, if you don't try it. And those are some things to think about, to chew on. Those are all incorruptible. Those are all prize-worthy. Make sure those things are in your life. Make sure that you have something that you do for Christ that you say, I've mastered that one. And that one's for Christ. And the ones that Paul talks about here, I think, are the best ones. The best crowns you can get. And otherwise, I would just say our life is just cast away. Let me encourage you. Be a master in the Lord's work. Get those crowns. And live a life that is of a testimony, like Paul. And we'll close the service on that note. But as I close our service here, let's take a moment to think about our own lives and think about how maybe God has brought these truths to our lives. And whatever it may be that you should pray about here tonight, pray about it. And take a minute or two to do just that. Let's all stand to our feet. And with our heads bowed and our eyes closed,